Good afternoon, everybody. Mary Hunt here with Diane New in the Water Office, Wednesday, January 19th, 2022. And I am delighted to welcome each and every one of you for the first of the Water Talks and Teas for 2022. We made it. And I wish you a Happy New Year, implicit in that, and just to say how excited I am to be starting these talks again. There's something very exciting about gathering, and it takes months to get these things sort of all organized and put together, but once they start, it's really fun because you get not only to see people but to hear new ideas and to get new stimulation for your own thinking. At least I do. So welcome. I want to give a special welcome to Susan Thistlewaite, whose latest mystery novel, What She Will Become, is our topic of today's conversation. And I happen to have in my hot little hands here a recent print of this, and I like it a lot, and I blurbed it, and I'll say more about it in a minute. But if you are becoming, as I am, a fan of Susan's mystery writing, this is duck soup, as it were, for you, or the vegan equivalent. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. We at Water are on Indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland. This is the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples, the original stewards of this territory. We're committed to making clear the names of these lands and the community members from these nations who reside along with us. We acknowledge the trauma that is deeply embedded in the foundation of this country and affirm the right of all people to bring their whole selves and their whole stories into this space. So, what is our format? This is a water talk, not to be confused with a water tea. They differ very slightly, if at all. But the water talk is usually based on a publication, and that's why Susan's book is front and center today. What I'll do is introduce our speaker. Susan will talk for 20 or 25 minutes, as long as she feels like, with plenty of time left for dialogue, for questions and answers and discussion. So please listen and enjoy. Have your lunch if you'd like. We usually take notes, which will be on our website shortly after Susan's had a chance to look at them for accuracy or add anything we may have missed. Or Susan, if you actually have notes from your talk, we love those too, and then there's no mistake. But I invite you at this point to mute your audios, except for Susan and myself, to cut down on noise and assure a clear line for the presentation. When Susan finishes, you'll be able to come on in the Q&A. So don't think you're being cut off here. You're simply being put on hold until we finish the presentation. We will end the whole session at 2 o'clock Eastern time out of respect for everyone's schedule. And you can re-listen or point other people in the direction of this teleconference by going to Water's website at www.waterwomensalliance.org. Look under programs, Water Talks, and there it will be. So you can use it again. These are great for, please mute your phones if you don't mind. These things are great to use with groups, community groups, congregations, with classes. Okay, everybody wants to have Susan Thistlewaite with them, but you can't all have her because she's very busy and she's writing, and we can't take her time away from writing. But we can promote her through this work, and I will invite you, those who are here today, to stay on the line if you want after 2 o'clock to continue conversation, but the official session will end at 2 with our gratitude to Susan, who may or may not have a few minutes to stay with us. That's totally up to her, but I can see her fingers will be itching by then to get back to the home keys. So let me introduce Susan Brooks Thistlewaite, no stranger to water. She was with us in April 2016 to discuss her very powerful book, Women's Bodies as Battlefield. Some of you, I'm sure, were here for that and remember it well. She returned in September of 2020 in her new capacity as a mystery writer, exploring feminist theoethical concerns through fiction. The book that time was When Demons Float, part of a series about a feminist detective turned philosophy professor whose daring do and smarts combine to address contemporary issues on campus: racism, poverty, ethnic oppression, and many others that go well beyond the campus world. Today, Susan brings us a new protagonist, Miss, not Ms., there was no Ms. then, Miss Alex Bell, in a mystery novel set in the 1960s in Washington. I'll let her fill you in, but let me in fact, begin by saying that I would like to do credit to Susan for her academic work as well as for this new, more than hobby, full-time work as a writer, which I think is just a marvelous way to move in one's career. Susan is professor emerita and president emerita as well at Chicago Theological Seminary, where she taught for 20 years before serving as the 11th president from 1998 to 2008. Please mute your phones, folks. Please mute your phones so we don't have to. Thank you. Prior to assuming the presidency, she was also the director of the PhD Center at Chicago Theological Seminary for 5 years. She's a graduate, as some of you heard earlier, of Smith College, where Jeanette Stokes is also a graduate, and the heroine of this book also happens to be a graduate of Smith College. Isn't that a coincidence? How did that happen? She has a PhD from Duke, where Jeanette Stokes encountered her at the Divinity School, although they knew each other, I guess, at Smith. They lived in the same house there, I'm told, these Smithies. And of course, you'll hear more of our heroine today, who is also a Smith graduate. Susan is an ordained minister of the United Church of Christ. She's been ordained since 1974. She's the author of editor of at least 16 books. And in retirement, as I mentioned, she maintains an active presence, especially in her local Colorado newspaper, and as a writer of the Kristen Janelli mystery series that I mentioned. And the next one will be coming. We're waiting, Susan. I happen to have it to blurb, so I won't mention any of the details of it. She's editor and contributing author of popular resources, including Interfaith Just Peacemaking, which is a very popular book. She also published Occupy the Bible, What Jesus Really Said and Did About Money and Power. If you really want to look at those issues in a close way, I recommend it. And in 1999, Orbis Press published the 10th anniversary edition of Lift Every Voice, Constructing Christian Theologies from the Underside, which Susan edited with Mary Potter Engel, one of the most widely used textbooks in theological teaching in the U.S. She's the founder and former trustee of Faith in Public Life. She's been on the advisory board of the American Academy of Religion section on religion and politics. So many things that she's done, including working with the Carter Center, and is not new to any of the issues that she's going to speak about today. In fact, she brings what I think of as a world of experience and a wealth of analysis. Susan's been working as a white woman on anti-racism and against white supremacy before many of us knew what that was. She's explored violence against women from every ghastly, and I repeat, ghastly angle. And she's taught theology and ethics with a deep commitment to remaking the world, looking at the environment, social relations between religion and politics. And she brings all of that incredible background to writing mystery stories. And this new book combines many of these perennial themes with a special focus on the dirty dealing of governments and how the greatest impact of their activities is always on those who live on the margins because of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, and poverty. Here's how I blurbed the book. It's on the back cover. Susan Thistlewaite's fourth mystery novel leaves the reader reeling, breathless, and aching for more. Heroine Alex Bell, Smith graduate, is tougher than J. Edgar Hoover and his agents, smarter than seasoned DC operatives, and as principled as ministers and journalists who step up to moral challenges. Scapegoating women, queer people, and people of color has deep and intertwined roots in American society that the author explores with panache. Delve into this complex read about the ancestors of the dark web and the violent right to see contemporary social dynamics in sharp relief. I must say, Susan, I reread the book for today's conversation, having read it, of course, for the blurb. I liked it when I blurbed it, but I love it now. I've gone back and picked up some of the clues that you dropped, some of the hints that you provided in the text that I missed the first time. But mostly I was fascinated with how you weave important ethical themes into a compelling story. Welcome back, and tell us more about your work. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks. So I was, obviously I reread the book too, because, after 5 novels, it all merges into one giant narrative. When I retired, I started writing fiction because I'd always loved writing fiction. And I decided now or never, I'm going to write, a fiction novel. But you don't stop being the mind and the committed person that you've been. And so retrospectively, I began to realize that I was having the fiction show the kinds of struggles and commitments that we as feminists, womanists, and mujerista theologians, and all of those who struggled in the trenches are committed to. But as we do it in our theology books, I found it was readers who got back to me after the first novel, and a lot of churches have book clubs. A lot of them, my novels are most popular with book clubs, and that's why the discussion questions came about. How does it perform? And so, you know, I had written the 3 about Kristen Janelli, who is basically me in a fantasy world where I get to have been a former Chicago cop. And but the 4th novel, I wanted to do a historical novel. And there are lots of historical novels in the mystery genre. A lot of them are 19th century, World War I, World War II. But oddly enough, the 1960s is very neglected. And given, you know, the perils of our time, the 1960s are such a formative period for this culture, for good and for ill. And, you know, we just had Dr. King Day yesterday, and, you know, J. Edgar Hoover loathed Dr. King. And I have a summary at the end of this novel of some of the books I read, and one is on Hoover. And another one is on a Freedom of Information Act with the release of papers. And Hoover's tenure at the FBI and his hatreds have greatly influenced the society. And so I wanted to do a 1960s thing, and I ended up backing into having this be semi-autobiographical. My character is Hungarian, and so am I, immigrant family. And her family, as mine, came to as immigrants to New York City at the end of World War I, and worked in sweatshops in the garment district of New York. And like I sew extremely well. I don't do it very much anymore, but I can make anything. I can make coats, I can make suit jackets, and so forth. But Hungarians, as these waves of immigrants came, the Irish, the Hungarians, there is a sociological studies now of how these immigrants tried to achieve whiteness. How could they become white? And there is Mary's, of course, right about the tentacles of racism in this society are so deep, so wide, so tenacious. And so I wanted to take a look at that, and I wanted to take a look at it through the lens of, now, it's not completely autobiographical. The one person who's the closest to a family member is my character's aunt. And I never knew my grandmother, who was the other character in there. She died when I was 3, but I knew my aunt very well. And I talked to her a lot over the course of her life. And especially when I was a religion major at Smith. And Anne Helen, was a labor organizer for the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, and carried a gun until in the nursing home. We first were able to get the bullets, and then eventually the actual gun. But she had a very rough life, as did my grandmother, I take it. And but she was just tenacious person about labor rights. And so, there's that push-pull in the novel of that generation. And then the younger generation, my main character, wanting to change things, but at the same time wanting to be white, to fit in. And she lightens her hair and she lightens her skin with lemon juice. And she adds an L to her last name to go from the Hungarian Bell, B-E-L, to the double L, which is British, Bell. And I was a child model when I was very little. And my mother lightened my hair, lightened my skin, permed my hair, so I would look like Shirley Temple. And this is formative for me. I am the lightest skinned person in my family. And I realized many years later, and I rebelled when I was 5, you will be unsurprised at this, and refused any longer to model these clothes, and threw tantrums and would not do it anymore. I did not, of course, as a kid, realize, my parents were being paid for this and it was a source of income. But I just wouldn't. And the achieving whiteness, how do you achieve whiteness in, this very actually multiracial, multicultural society that we live in? But the other thing I wanted to look at, and Mary mentioned, I've done a lot on peace and war, national security, and so forth. And a lot of Americans know about the Red Scare, of course, about the threat of communists and, McCarthy and so forth and so on. But relatively few know about the Lavender Scare, which is the persecution of LGBTQI people as a security threat. And this is very central to this novel. And the one thing that I wanted to perform, let us say, in terms of feminist theology in this, is the body and how the boundaries of the body are set to be the boundaries of national security or national security threat. And simply being gay in that era, and in Hoover's view, I have a little water here, in Hoover's view, was to be a national security threat by definition. And so the white heteropatriarchal male is the definition of national security. And the African Americans and women of any color are all national security threats. And this has to do literally with controlling the boundaries of the body, controls the boundaries of the country. I mean, it's that deep. And so to see how this plays out in Washington, and I wrote for the Washington Post on Faith section for almost a decade. And I was periodically in Washington. The cocktail party scene that's there is a real cocktail party that I attended without the without the actual threats. But they at one of those receptions in Georgetown, someone said to me, Washington runs on cocktail parties. And it seemed to me that that was a central theme as well, because I have two cocktail parties. And one is the upper echelons of the LGBTQI community, and one is the Washington elite. And do they overlap? Of course they do. And so many of the buried secrets in Washington, and I have a pretty obvious metaphor for the buried Washington secrets. I don't know if everybody knows, but in the Lincoln Memorial, there is a giant basement underneath Lincoln. And when I was writing the novel and I was researching this, because I wanted a subterranean location for the exchange of these secrets. And my husband, who grew up in Washington, D.C., said that as a kid, he went on a school field trip and they went into the basement. You're no longer allowed to do this because they found asbestos there. But there is a giant basement under Lincoln. And so various things happen under Lincoln. And the cover is another, famous statue from Washington. It's exquisite. And it's in the Rock Creek Cemetery. And the title comes from Robert Frost at John F. Kennedy's inauguration. And he added a couple of words to his poem that he read at Kennedy's request, called The Gift Outright, which is just a hymn to American exceptionalism. I mean, it's just, we are fabulous and we're a gift to the world. But the words he added included the phrase, what she will become, of course, feminizing the country. And the question is, what will we become? And the next novel in this series, this 1961 series, is going to be a further exploration. There's going to be two narratives. One, an investigation of how the Bay of Pigs fiasco takes place and the freedom rides. And there you have it. There are two Americas, and they conflict, provoke, and I mean, I don't have to explain this to you. We are living this. I mean, today we are living it with the debate about whether people will be allowed to vote, and whether, God help us, the votes will even be counted. So I'm going to try to take that further in the historical novels. What are we becoming? And that, that crucible of the 1960s is central to that, because so much of what enabled, I mean, John Kerry, when he was Secretary of State, apologized in writing, I quote the apology, to the LGBTQI community for the persecution of them in the State Department. I read some autobiographical material from people who had been persecuted in the State Department, and how we set about addressing the deep narrative of this country, which is a narrative of control. what do you get to control in terms of the body and in terms of security? And, the pandemic, which in all, I have, even in the contemporary now, I'm not addressing the pandemic. I don't think we have any idea what that is doing to us as well. And I decided, I hate to think about the pandemic, so I'm not going to write about it. So the next novel, the contemporary one, is about a women's prison. And you want to talk about control of the body. I mean, there you go. That's kind of the gist of the thing. I've tried to sort of give you the larger sketch without giving away the plot and who done it. And also, let me just finally say, in the novels I write, there's always a dog. I like dogs, and but Miss B, the dog in this historical novel, is different than the dog in my contemporary novels, because you hear her thoughts. And she is extremely sarcastic, as I think any thinking dog would be, of Washington, D.C. in 1961. So there you have it.
Well, thank you so very much. You have whetted the appetite. I'm sure there are some eager readers ready to load their Kindles this afternoon with this wonderful book. And I, having now read it twice, might go back a third time. I don't know. Thank you for this stimulating run through the ways of national security inside Washington and the ugly underbelly of oppression. My most salient comment I think I can make, Susan, is to say that little has changed since the 1960s. That's what's really so, in some ways, depressing about it. Here we are on this very day watching Russia threaten Ukraine, and
Right.
it's sort of history is like a bad B movie. It's that there's I have that feeling that, and especially this setting in the 1960s really helps, with the kind of Russian under theme and the Cuban questions and so forth. So I think as we turn to discussion that you do something very important here, which is that you delve into an historical period that most of us lived through, depending on our age, with various levels of consciousness, but we can see that in a new way. And now you help us to see what we're looking at the moment, what we're experiencing at the moment, through that lens as well. So it's kind of a dual achievement here as far as I see it. I want to invite people to get into the conversation. I have arm's length of questions to ask and comments to make, but I'd like to open it up for other people first to get started with it. So if you want to raise your hand, to go down to the reaction button on the bottom right-hand side and raise your hand, and then as I have just done, and then when you're finished, you can lower your hand, or we can lower it for you. And then just give us your name and make your question or your comment brief if you can, so that we can hear from a number of people. But the floor is open. And Susan, we're in your debt. I mean, this is another terrific publication. I want to show it one more time. It's published by Resource Publications. It is called What She Will Become, as Susan has mentioned. Now we know the origin of the title. And treat yourself to a good read and expect to have your head whirling, as mine was when I finished it again, thinking about the many issues and how, in fact, they have not changed as much as we might have hoped, if at all, in the last, may we say, 60 years.
Yeah.
Floor is open. So, Jeanette Stokes, you're first. See, the Smithies get right in. They're they're not only clubby, but they're very aggressive in the best sense. The best sense of aggressive. They're aggressive women in a good way.
Susan, I have not been a mystery writer, so I have not grabbed your books, but I will now, knowing what a good writer you are. And I just want to say that I think this is a brilliant approach, because it's likely that more lay people will read the novels than would read your really fine theology books. So I think it's just brilliant. And as a public theologian, which you are, I think it was just a really smart move. Newspapers and novels, people will read. Were you a religion major in college?
Yeah, I was pre-law up until junior year, Jeanette, and then uh, it was Vietnam. I was an anti-war activist, and the lying by the lawyers to support the war, I thought, I can't do this. And so I switched to religion, thinking it was about truth and justice. And then you get into seminary and too late, all right. But thank God, found liberation theology and was able to do that work. But yeah, I was pre-law. I went to Smith planning to be a lawyer.
Planning to be a lawyer. So you were not an English major. So writing novels was not something you practiced before you started, but you did have a humanities degree. So I just want a little bit more about how you said to yourself, I mean, this is like you, but I'm going to do this. I've never done this before. I'm going to do it. Did you have to take classes or read?
Yeah.
I mean, you've been reading novels all your life, but how did you kind of get over that hump?
Well, yes, as I am, I retired, I sat down and I wrote 3/4 of a novel. And it was awful, Jeanette, just awful. Everyone was me and they were lecturing others. And so I thought, well, this is no good. So I attended the Iowa Writers Workshop. They have actually a mystery writers intensive that I took for several weeks, 2 summers in a row. And they really helped me. And it was, it was genuinely frightening to stand up and read your fiction makes you so vulnerable because the feminist theology, it's controversial, but I can stand on my footnotes. I'm quoting Mary Hunt. I know what I'm talking about. And it's not so scary. But you make it up, and you make it up from inside yourself. It is a very vulnerable feeling. And the first time I stood up to write this chapter, I was trembling. I really was, to read it to other people. And yet I think your point, Jeanette, is well taken. Therefore, it invites people in a way that even, some of the most wonderful feminist theology we know, and I hope I have written some of that, but it's not as participatory. It's just not as participatory. And I think also writing all the columns for the public also helped me do that. But I had to really study hard to learn to write this way, because I threw the first novel away, of course. And that is not something that will go in the archives, Mary. It's just terrible. And so, but it's also, if when you get to a certain age, you're not willing to take new risks, I think you got to just keep trying.
Thanks. That's very helpful. Jeanette, you might want to go back, and others, you might want to go back to that 2020, I believe it was September of 2020 talk that Susan gave on When Demons Float, because there she talked a lot about the performative questions, and you could listen to that or watch the video on the Water website. So Susan has, in that experience, Susan, you talked a lot about your work of how you wrote and how you moved into writing and so forth. And I can say, after reading this again, that the marvelous thing of when you talk now about being able to sew, I personally can't put a button on, and I'm very fortunate to live with Diane New, who's very skilled in these areas, which has prohibited me from developing, or has helped me not to have to develop my own skills in this area. But your descriptions of fabrics, for example, your descriptions of the suits and the bespoke suits, and I thought, where did this come from? Really, really terrific kind of description, down to the bulging buttons of some of these fat police officers. I mean, it's the description that stayed with me this time. The same with the food. The Hungarian food I could taste. The paprika I could smell. It's just the cheese. I want that cheese.
You know,
The dog loved the cheese. Well, that's good enough, you know? I mean, it's that kind of detail that I think invites the common reader. I'm not a reader of mysteries particularly either, or novels in general, as friends know. But these have captivated me because of the detail and they're delicious. I mean, literally, I could smell as I walked into the mother's and the aunt's apartment building. You know, one could smell what those smells were.
yeah, yeah.
The thick coffee that they served. I mean, this is a kind of writing that's so different from theological, ethical writing, and yet conveys the same questions. Mary Jelinek, you'd be next.
Hungarian coffee will keep you up for days. Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Go ahead, Mary.
Hi,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you, Susan. This is really fascinating. You've raised so many issues, and I wish we could have a full hour of discussion on the political issues you've raised and some of the legal issues and immigration. There's so much you raised already. But my question is about the mysteries. I love mystery. I love mysteries. And I'm wondering how you write them, because is it difficult to have to sort of hide motive and hide method? Because that's what people are always trying to determine.
Right.
Do you write something and say, oh, I've revealed too much, and then pull it back later? Or how do you do it effectively?
Yes. Yeah, well, I make a storyboard. Okay. I mean, literally. So it's a long piece of paper. And before I start to write, every chapter is outlined. And then at the top, I will place where a clue needs to fit. And I do not like mystery novels that jerk the reader around. I like to put in enough clues that if you're really looking for them, because what good is it if they drop a character into you in the second to the last chapter and then he did it, you're just like, come on. So I mean, I like to do that, but you're exactly right. How much is too much? How much is too little? And when I have it laid out in the storyboard, I cannot do this online. It's just, it has to be such a visual to me, so I can see the whole novel. And of course I move things around, right? What has to come before this and so forth. And the nature of the clues too have to be the only best word is delicate, right? You got to say enough, but you don't want to bomb, because I've gotten to know my readers now. They're highly intelligent people. Most just they write to me, or there's book clubs and so forth and so on. And they're people looking for an intellectual challenge. They like the puzzle. That's what I like about mysteries. I like a puzzle. And so you want to respect that with people. And I think, as Jeanette was saying earlier, I also think, though, people are not as intimidated by a novel as they would be picking up a book in feminist theology in a book club, or in it makes a difference for accessibility, how people can it can make our ideas accessible. And so, but you're making a really good point. It is very tough to do, in other words. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary. Diane New?
I just want to say thank you, because you really have opened me up to mysteries. Friends have talked to me about mysteries a large part of my life, and I didn't grab them. I couldn't. I read your books, and all of a sudden, I think what you just said, your readers want the intellectual piece there. It just like, whoa. So I have now gone from your books to Louise Penny's books.
Oh yeah.
And it's like they're all
that.
lined up on my shelf. And, Mary's laughing because I get into a book and from start to finish, you don't see me. And you have brought that joy into my life.
Glad.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad. And it's very immersive, right? And gosh, don't we need to check out a little bit in these times? And, but I gave a talk at the American Academy of Religion once on the moral universe of the mystery novel, because you can experience very, very difficult, challenging things, including death, but you have a contract with the writer, which is the bad guy's going to get it in the end. And I'll tell you something else. One of my daughters-in-law pointed out to me that most victims in mystery novels are women. And I have stopped that. But the girl who, look at the list of these mystery novels, the girl who this, the girl who that. And it was extremely good suggestion, even though of course there is a lot of violence against women. So it's a judgment call. But I think that's what I find pulls me, and certainly with Louise Penny, because Gamache is such a deeply compassionate human being that it allows you to see into the grief that in some ways is in the heart of detection. She's fantastic. I can only aspire to be 1/100th as good.
Well, Susan, can we break the story now that Hillary's asked you to do the second novel with her? And
Yes,
Louise is so busy.
Hillary and I, of course, we're like this.
Can we break that here? I'd like to break that, and that would get me ahead of Rachel Maddow today. But I think that would be,
Gee, I think
don't write that off. Don't write that off, Susan. Don't write that off. I'm going to go on to Kimberly. Go ahead, Kimberly. You're next.
Hey, Kimberly.
Hi, Susan. This book, I like I had said early when I started on the call, I just started it last night and I'm almost halfway through it. I won't be able to go to bed tonight without finishing it. As a local church pastor, I think one of the most critical things you've said that makes the most sense to me is so many people, I serve a very small congregation that's I would say they're not particularly liberal. They're very purple, and I really struggle with reaching some of them. And some of what I learned at CTS is it's really hard to break it down to them, when you're just preaching once a week, right?
Yeah.
And like you say, I think you've really hit on something so powerful with these books, because you make it approachable, because these people that I'm serving are never going to pick up a theology book.
Right.
It's totally intimidating to them. And you met some of them because I had you speak when we did the first book club on When Demons Float, and there was such learning and incredible conversations that came out of our small little church from that book. I can't wait to introduce them to this one.
Yeah. Oh, great. And let me know how that goes. Okay.
I will absolutely. And I'm
refining and, trying to improve them.
Yeah. I mean, particularly the fact that you've hit on something so powerfully, and even just listening to this conversation, the power behind the history that is so deeply embedded in who we are. I'm in my well into my 50s now. So I was born during the 60s. So a lot of what I'm learning through reading this. I had never heard of the Lavender Scare until I had heard you speak of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure many of the people in my church have never heard of that, but I'm sure.
And they hide it for a reason, Kimberly.
Sure.
They hide it for a reason. These histories are hidden so that we could, they could keep doing it over and over and over again.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, what was in writing when Demons Float was when I discovered that my oldest grandchild had hacked his tablet at 8. I mean, that part of the novel is true when the kid hacks the tablet and the white supremacists are trolling online for kids to recruit them into white supremacy. It's as a grandmother, it scared the living daylights out of me,
Oh, sure. It scared me reading it. I've got a 24-year-old son who's very into gaming, and I know that's a whole subculture that I'm not familiar with, right? So that really opened up some interesting dialogue between he and I on what he's experienced bullying wise, and just what he sees around a lot of different issues.
And the misogyny is staggering. I mean, I went this is a side note, friends, but to write that book, these people are so dangerous that I went to the library and I used library computers with an anonymous number code rather than ever revealing who I was to go on these white supremacist websites. And it'll scare you witless, honest to God.
It's very real. I mean, I can tell my son's persona. It's like he almost has to be a different person when he's online gaming.
Let me suggest again
my oldest son who is a gamer, let me just add this. I had him also look at some of these chat rooms and so forth and so on, and he changed his avatar, and he is now a female avatar. And I really admired that in him.
Wow.
So he takes the brunt of the misogyny.
Let me recommend again that 2020 talk, because it was that was the topic. What you're rehearsing now was the topic.
We as parents and grandparents and people who care about kids, we really got into it in that section. Yeah. You're right, Mary.
But it's wonderful, and that's why we record them, because it's really great. Susan, I'd like to ask you 2 very specific content questions. One is that a lot of what you write about is about the police, whether it's the detectives in the Ginelli series, and in this, of course, the extraordinary corruption of people in law enforcement. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about police violence now, 60 years on. Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, say their names. Gross acts of police acting brutally and in some cases almost as vigilantes or doing both. I just wonder how you read things in the major police departments these days. I mean, could they be engaged in drug activities? But really my question is this, Susan. We always think about the question of how will people in poor neighborhoods, mainly people of color, ever gain trust in the police? I think that's the wrong question.
Oh, yeah.
I think the question we should be asking is how will people in rich, mostly white neighborhoods get over their sense of entitlement that the police are their private security guards?
Right.
I think if we switch that question, we could really make some headway in this terrible dilemma that we have on our hands of police in general. So I just wonder if you have any reflections on that. Am I onto something in terms of that switch? Because that's really the issue, isn't it? That white people think that the police are there to protect them. They're really hired through their taxes to protect them. And people of color know that they have to be afraid of the police. I mean, and so all the talk gets on the people of color are afraid of the police. But what about this? How do we dislodge both of those things?
Yeah, and we're a multiracial family.
Yeah.
And now my oldest grandchild is 16, and my son has had the talk.
Yeah.
With this child about the police. I mean, this is the same child that hacked the tablet. But yeah,
how confusing for kids like that who have grown up in places where the police are seen as our private security guards.
Yeah.
You know, they work for us to help us. How confusing is that?
I think, the continuing narrative in my novels is also negotiating my whiteness and even, immigrant whiteness and how you become white. And you aspire to whiteness. It's easier to be white. You get far less hassles. And but then how you the long and deep history. I mean, the New York police at the time, I researched this as well. They were effectively the mob. That's what Serpico's about. I mean, watch the movie Serpico when the one guy tries to bring down the corrupt New York Police Department, and it has all the character, whether in 1961 or today, it has all the characteristics of a cult. Okay, so the whole "there's a few bad apples" is just baloney. Good people get socialized into this cult-like behavior, which is the blue line. Don't cross the blue line and so forth, and stay, inside the circle. Or you are really literally putting your life at risk. I mean, you just really don't want to get outside the circle. And, Papa Janelli is a good Chicago cop, right? And there are people in law enforcement in this novel who, not in the cops, but in other aspects of law enforcement, who are good people. One, as the last scene shows, literally torn apart in his heart and in his head. So this is a sense, I guess, of the competing narratives. They're here to protect us. It's just a few bad apples, versus this is an army of occupation to police the boundaries of white supremacy. And that's what it is. And it hasn't dropped from the sky. I mean, a great deal of this comes out of slavery and the whole thing with the militias. We could spend a whole WATERtalk on this in terms of, and I have some friends who read, like you do, Mary, chapters and draft. And some people get upset at me at portraying how so much of this police, but the drug trafficking, that's real. I mean, you actually just read the papers, right? But in this new novel that I'm working on the page proofs on, which is about a women's prisons themselves, the system of incarceration, says everything we need to know about warehousing the minority body. So what's so frustrating is it's not amenable of any easy solutions. And I've been in a dialogue with some, friends, and talking about how many people marched in the George Floyd marches, right? How many white people? And they wander away. Where are they? If those people had stayed mobilized, we would be changing this country. But because white people don't feel racism on a daily basis, you can walk away, and you're not even doing bad stuff. You're working on climate change, and you're working on, trying to keep your own job, have your kid wear a mask in school and so forth. It's not like but for racial ethnic minority people, you can't not think about this or you could be dead. And it's just a
Yeah.
totally different immersion. But it was the same in the civil rights movement. I mean, how many people, white people, participated in the civil rights movement and then just walked away? I had a dean at a school that shall remain nameless, that is not CTS, and this dean had once marched with King, and he was white guy. He was persuaded forever after that he could not be racist, and he was as racist as the day is long, as well as a misogynist. And so, I mean, there is no easy answer to this. There is no easy answer.
Well, I appreciate that, and I just wanted to flag the police thing because a lot of people don't have it's such a persistent theme in your writing, and
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely onto something that many of us have not really focused our attention on, and especially this notion of there being our own security guards versus our persecutors, and I think that is central to what you're doing. I also, and just with one last comment because we need to close shop here for the official time. Does anyone else have a comment they want to make before we close officially? You can stay on and chat. If I just wanted to mention something that I thought also that came to me in the second reading, as it were, and that was that the murder victim in this book is a man, which is interesting, but a man who was dressed in women's clothing, a cross-dressing man, whether by his own will or by those who killed him, which probably is more likely. But he was a State Department official and a gay black man in all of the grisly and homo-hating ways that mock cross-dressing and use sex, in this case, as a ruse for covering up the real reason for his death.
Right.
And I just found that so powerful, that he was on to the corruption of government officials. And so what happens in these cases, and what the police do, is they mark them in terms of gender and sexuality, which is stigmatized and despised. And then how do you explain this to people that in fact they miss his position? The man is a lawyer, the man is working for the State Department, and all they see is that he was a cross-dressing gay man. Maybe we don't even know if he was, but Susan, that's the kind of complexity that I want to flag and thank you for, because that really helps us to look at what's incidental and what's essential, what's
Right.
accidental, what's essential, those kind in lots of situations. I think you do that so very well.
Well, I tried, Mary, as you well know, as the novel unfolds, that you get to know his character.
Yeah.
And not only, but he's a musician as well as a lawyer, and
Accomplished jazz musician.
accomplished jazz musician. And so then the controversy about his funeral, because the homophobic pastor won't bury it, but then his father's jazz musician friends in Harlem will do the jazz funeral. And I have to give full credit to Cheryl Townsend Jokes, who walked me through that, including picking the music. I mean, I made up the musicians and the characters, but Cheryl, I have not a musical bone in my body. I'm sure this is not a skill I have. So Cheryl walked me through this. I rely on friends. I rely on friends and people with expertise for things I don't know. But I wanted to make his death even more poignant and outrageous, also by who loved him.
And it was lovely, the piece that you put in, that his father's instrument was used in the funeral celebration.
Yeah,
and it was his mother's second husband, his would-be stepfather, who was not only homophobic and homo-hating, but also a minister.
yeah.
On that happy note, I'm going to close us so that we can, those who need to leave can do so gracefully and others can stay on for a bit of conversation. I want to thank you, Susan. I will have you back. I promise you. I think these are so important as sessions that help us to get at the issues, but also to get at what's underneath the issues, and also to be with a person, in this case yourself, a person who is really doing something so creative and so important and so helpful for all of us. You give us a lot of hope for doing new things. The audio recording of this session will be on our website shortly, www.waterwomensalliance.com. We'll also put up notes, and you can access those and use them for your own programs and projects. They are under the Water Talks. They'll be under the Water Talks under the program tab on the Water website. I want to mention 3 upcoming programs. One is the Water Ritual that Diane New will be doing on Tuesday, the 25th of January at 7:30. Step into the pool with Sojourner Truth. In keeping with the I Have a Dream theme of this week, Diane and friends will raise up African American women who inspire us to live the dream, telling the stories about anti-racism, women's rights, and nonviolence, challenging one another to step into the pool. Another program coming up is on February the 7th, Monday night. It's our monthly meditation. Brad Lutz, who's a retired UCC minister, will be looking at finding purpose and identity in times of transition. And as you know, in those sessions, we have about a 7-minute input and then 22 minutes of silence in contemplation and then dialogue, all in an hour. And it's really gotten to be a very popular program because it's very interesting input. This week it was Carrie Roach doing something on the Psalm of Grief by Miriam Treese Winter, and that was very evocative. And Brad Lutz on the 7th of February will be as well, I'm sure. And then the third program I want to bring to your attention will be on Tuesday, February 15th. I think we're alternating this year between a talk and a tea. And you might know, what's the difference? Well, the tea is Tuesday at 2 and the talk is Wednesday at 1. That's one difference. But content-wise, there will be a lot of overlap. The teas tend to be a little bit more informal and not necessarily based on a book, but guess what? This one is. It's based on Canadian writer Rosemary Ganley's new book. We call her our own Rosemary Ganley. She will discuss her latest book, Gleanings, Columns from the Peterborough Examiner, 2018 to 21. This is her second collection of 128 pieces she publishes, Susan, on a weekly basis in the Peterborough Examiner. And she writes brilliantly. She deals with contemporary, sometimes hot button issues with verve and insight. This is not to miss. And she will be celebrating her 85th birthday upcoming in a couple of weeks. So I welcome you to be with our own Rosemary Ganley for that. It will be marvelous. The book is wonderful. It's a collection of those essays, and they really are very, some of them are very homey in terms of Peterborough, Ontario, which must be a great place to live, and some of them deal with the world's largest issues and problems and her own experience representing women when the G7 was in Canada. She was put on by Mr. Trudeau as one of the delegates. So Rosemary Ganley is a force to be reckoned with, and she is our own. So I welcome you to that, and that will be on Tuesday, February 15th, 2 o'clock. So please feel free to join us for these programs. I'm always happy to say that programs are free and open to everyone. I'll get to you, Susan, in a minute. The Elaine Donaldson Program Fund at Water is a new and great help to us, but your donations are needed and welcome. We try to socialize resources so that those who can donate, and many of you do very generously, do so to make water programs available to everyone without charge. So those who do not, cannot, don't want to donate, do not have to. They are welcome in exactly the same way. We believe at Water, sounds a little naive, but I say it all the time. If we share, among us, there's enough. And I think that's really a mantra. If we share, among us, there's enough. And I want to say that one more time. If we share, among us, there's enough. And Susan has shared today. And among us, we leave very, very full, Susan. So thank you. Also want to direct you to the chat. There's been some conversation going on there, especially about where to procure these books as an alternative to Amazon, for example. So please look in the chat. And Susan, you had your hand up, so go right ahead.
No, I was going to say there was a question about ordering the books. I have an author page at Amazon, but I use it simply as a place to have people go to. So then you can see every book I've ever written. And then I normally go to Goodreads to actually order a book. We all have our struggles with the, in fact, Amazon warehouses take a hit in my forthcoming novel. I included them as a proto prison system.
From everything we read, yes.
Yeah,
From
exactly.
everything we read.
So-
I'm going to close us officially and then simply say stay on for conversation. But if you have to leave, this is your graceful exit. And you always were taught, I'm sure, at Smith to make a graceful exit.
Oh, yeah. Maybe. Well, it was interesting, Mary, the choice of Smith, because when I was a student in '66 and the alumni came back from the 50s, the anti-war movement hit Smith like a bomb. And so from the, we started out my first year having to wear skirts. We had sherry in the lounge before dinner, demi-tasse after dinner, so on and so on, to literally within 6 months, ripped jeans, t-shirts. We kept the sherry, and I ended up being a part of the group that senior year shut Smith down in the strikes in the colleges when Nixon tried to widen the war into Cambodia. So it was a strategic choice because those graduates from 10 years before were literally like a finishing school. I mean, it was dramatic how it changed. And so that was interesting. I wanted to do a little bit following up on the homophobia in the Black community and what I learned from teaching at CTS, because it's just the racial diversity of CTS for decades has been a huge gift to me, to be able to have to confront my own whiteness and even the way I framed feminism and so forth. But I can remember an African-American male student early on, and he literally collapsed in class and came out and talked about faking it in his church. And it is hugely sacred moment because and that was, CTS always had a fairly large African-American student body. Now it is even larger, but it was all the gay people are white and African-Americans are gay. And so there was pressure, there. So this was a dramatic moment. And he wrote me a paper afterwards, which I will never quote. And it really helped me see all the struggles, all the layers of the struggles, because, there are people rightly saying, we're Black, we got enough prejudice against us. Why do you want to break ranks on sexuality too, right? I mean, it's just, and it's a product of the external racism. I mean, trying to dig your way through white supremacy and all the ways that, speaking for me personally, I feel it has deformed me and continues to deform me, is incredibly, I mean, it's just a daily project. It's just a daily project. You have to decide, I am going to do whatever I can in any way I can to just shovel this manure, just,
Something you did in the book too, Susan, that which I found very telling, was that you made that party. There's a scene in the book where Alex and her roommate, who happens to be the sister of this guy who is killed, went to a party which he would have normally gone to.
yeah,
And it was a mixed party. It was black and white, which was very interesting in the 60s, in some parts of Upper Georgetown or wherever exactly it was in DC. But that I thought was a very helpful detail to say that in the queer community there have been notorious problems, but there have also been tremendous efforts at and experiences of working together, of being together. Certainly, if you look at
yeah,
working class women's bars of that period or earlier, you have many black women and white women in lesbian bars that existed in those days. Those were mixed places in terms of race. Certainly, one of the places where some white women met their first black women.
yeah. Well, that book on that,
It's just a piece of.
well, the Queer DC talks about that. And in that era, DC is first majority African-American city in the United States. And, but there were certain bars that people went to, but the more socially elite folk in the queer community had these cocktail parties in private homes. And so it's also somewhat a class thing. And I actually considered having that scene in a bar. But given who I wanted to be there, and I also wanted the parallelism between that cocktail party and the cocktail party of the editor of the Washington Post. And some of the same people are there, so you're layering gender identities. That's a huge learning curve for me as well, right?
Yeah. If you read, for example, which I'm sure you have, Stone Butch Blues, Leslie Feinberg, Stone Butch Blues. There's a book that I can't remember the title of it that accompanies that. There's a sociological study that actually looks at the same period, and it was in Buffalo, New York. Stone Butch Blues, the context is Buffalo, New York, not not one of your major cities, as it were. But that Stone Butch Blues does have a number of black and white women, as I recall, and also this study of the lesbian community in Buffalo, New York in those days. You have some of that data. So anyway, I just found that kind of a little ray of hope in my own reading of your book, that there may be some pockets of that.
Well, and this is described in that book. I mean, that I did not make that up, but I want to just emphasize that for me as a cisgender person, just as race is a learning curve, so too is sexual orientation, and new and more. I have a reason to have really deeply considered transgender identity in the last couple of years, and have really thought what a gift to Western culture transgender identity is, because it messes with the binaries. And so much of what makes Western theology so vulnerable. I mean, you address this obliquely in relationship to the pornographic theologies of the Catholic hierarchy, but it's I blame Aristotle, I really do, but the way in which it's this or that, right? It's grace or it's sin. It's this, it's that. And so, we get broken from the beginning in the way we approach our theological reflections if we buy into these binaries. And so the transgender community is such a gift it's such a gift to,
Well, and remember, it was our beloved, our dear and beloved Rosemary Radford Ruther, who pushed us to think about not just the binaries, but the hierarchical
right,
nature of them built in. And you know, the people, there have been some women writing in the law too who have said there's never a way to have difference without distinction,
right,
and without the gradations. And that's really, to me, the question. Differences are wonderful, but if you and the binaries could even, I mean, they're not defensible, but they survived a long time. It's the extent to which one is always better than the other.
right. Oh, absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
and that's really the key to it. It's the hierarchical dualism, and that was Rosemary's.
Yeah.
That was one of Rosemary's great contributions, was hierarchical dualism.
Yeah.
I you know, we have her to thank.
Absolutely. I mean,
Mary Ellen, if you just put something in the chat, did you want to say that as well? Dualism's being deadly. Yes.
deadly, deadly. You got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which bodies are accessible for violence and which are protected? And that goes back to, you know, which bodies are the cops going to protect? And which are going to be shot. So, no, it's absolutely the case.
Yeah, Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, and that relates back to what something you'd said earlier, Susan, about immigrants becoming white. My grandfather came from Slovenia in the early 20s or late 1900s, and my grandmother, who was born in Colorado, native-born American, lost her citizenship upon marriage to him because he was an Eastern European man. So
Yeah.
there was a law in existence for about 3 years, which did that to women who dared marry these interlopers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the Central Europeans, you know, and the Italians.
Yeah, Eastern
Central
Europe.
Europeans, right? They, you know, as opposed to the Germans, the British, and so forth. Absolutely. And I mean, Colorado, having lived there some now, is a very racist place, very different than Chicago, though. It's different than thing, but they, I mean, I've written for our local paper on Aurora. All of these police shootings in Aurora of by police of African Americans, and was one of the sundown towns. Sundown towns are, it's white after sundown. If you're a racial ethnic minority person, you have to get out of town by sundown. You can work there, but you got to get out of town. And Aurora was a sundown town. And that young man who's just, you know, was the violinist who was just walking home and the police killed him.
Yeah.
That's Aurora. So, you know, Colorado has that, you know, the kind of frontier mentality, and, you know, was holding the line against these immigrants.
Yeah, the Klan was very active. Klan was very active in Denver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Mary's from Denver, by the way. Just grew up there, I guess I should say, Mary. Yeah. And Susan, you're living now near Vail. Is that where you are?
We live, you know, we're spending the winter now here in Southern California, but we live up in the mountains. We can't afford to live in Vail. we live in a little town, little down valley. But yeah, it's a friend of mine who grew up in Wyoming said that out west where the men are men and so are the women. Just, you know, I mean, tough cookies. Some of the women and they're real tough cookies, you know, which is a good thing and a bad thing in some ways. But it's been interesting to see, you know, every area constructs these social controls in different ways, but the social controls remain, right? I mean, that's the constant.
Susan, if you'll indulge me one more reflection on the book.
Yeah.
I was taken by the fact, and again, it's set in 1961, but I was taken by the pathos of each of the women characters' lives. The senator who was really very required, really, in order to hold her job, which she got because her husband had preceded her, of course, as was the way, but that she was so constrained in how she could behave.
Yeah.
Her assistant, longtime assistant, so constrained in how she could behave. The two of them calling each other, senator and miss, and only in the worst of situations did they use each other's first names. And I just thought you crafted that so very well. And then, of course, the many ways in which Alex and Gwen, her roommate, were put upon, and the assumption by the police that they were a lesbian couple when in fact they weren't.
Right.
More's the pity, perhaps, but they weren't.
Yeah, right, exactly.
They're wonderful women, and the pathos of each of their lives, what you described for Alex in terms of the skin lightening and the immigrant issues, but also for Gwen, the roommate, or the ways in which she had to find her place in the world as a Black woman. And just each one of the women characters, there was I came away from it saying, oh my God, how did women, we think it's hard. How did those women do it? How did they do, because you make them so believable, and they are to me because they are based in reality. It just made me wonder again about the women before me. I was in high school in the late 60s, so I'm not.
Just a few more minutes.
But I just wanted to point that out, that I thought it was a wonderful, but really hard to read reality.
Well, and I want to relate, Kimberly, also to the members of the church, and the women who grew, was my mother-in-law, very different people, but knowing women of that period and the depths of what they don't say, and the things that they have done to survive, and to try to, as women of my generation as well, and the younger women make different choices, but still are making those choices. Getting to know my daughters-in-law and how they negotiate, and then, to some extent refuse to negotiate, which is interesting. So yeah, I really like character development, and I work on it a lot. I meant to say, when I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, for every character, especially for major characters, you write a biography of that character. Where were they born? What were they? Were they their childhood, their education? Even if it never comes into the novel, you know them in a way that is deep. And then you can have them behave in ways that are true to their character. So some of these biographies are pages and pages long. Favorite color, favorite foods. I struggled with anorexia as a kid, and I'm having, the Alex's difficulties with food. And then, of course, food at her grandmother and her aunts, and then Mrs. Bronsky, who was actually real. Mrs. Bronsky was the across the hall neighbor of my great aunt Helen, and got to know Mrs. Bronsky in the tenements of New York quite well. And those butter cookies, oh God.
I tasted them; they were great.
Yeah, oh my God! There's just a little bit of flour, and the rest is butter and sugar. So, but always, because they were poor, my, thing. And also the cost of food, and going to have enough for the week. And, and I grew up that way. We were not in any way, especially before I was like 12, 13. And so, but it was my great aunt Helen saying, the children get the milk, what she's saying. And it just, so how food and the body come together, and we could do a whole session on women and food, right?
Oh yeah.
It would have to be a tea. I'll just
right. And but just how much that is marketed then to women about their bodies, how their bodies are, and so, in these biographies, the body habitus of people and how you develop a character, and then you get to know them so well that they're able then to behave in the norm. But this takes a lot of time to prepare. To the actual writing of the novel is in some ways the easiest part, because everybody's got a script and they've got their biographies, and then you put them in the scenes, and and they act, they do things.
I have loved getting to know Alex Bell. I've just really,
Wait till you get to the rest of the book. You're gonna love her even more.
yeah.
And I came away loving.
I have to
Gwen.
admit,
Gwen was-
one of the things I do enjoy most, Susan, is the fact that I see you in it.
Oh, thank you,
And
dear.
I really, I do enjoy it. In fact, that's how I got Rebecca hooked. I went to visit her up at her farm, another Smith grad friend, who had not read Susan's novels. And I had brought one up with me when I went to visit her at her farm. And I got her hooked.
Well, it feels a little like, to me, when I get a really good mystery novel, it's a little like eating dark chocolate,
Yeah.
Just,
You can't
Well,
stop what
I
you
wish you well to do both of those things today. I have the next manuscript to read, which I didn't get to on the weekend, but I plan to this week to meet my deadline for the blurb, Susan. But I will have an extra little piece of dark chocolate while I do
Yeah,
it.
excellent,
Enhance
excellent.
my,
And now I get to
my-
read this book since Mary's
Here, Diane.
finished with it twice.
So lovely to be with all of you. Susan, thank you so much. It's just great. And you have a ready audience here. So whenever you're ready, we're ready. And it helps all of us, I think, to not only look at the issues, but also to do it as I think Kimberly and others have said, in a way that many, many, many more people can have access. And we can talk about a book like this with people that we can't talk about.
Right.
In memory of her. They're not gonna,
No.
there's just not the same audience, and so
Right.
not both have their place, but terrific.
It has always seemed to me that being a feminist is a work of the imagination, because you
Absolutely.
have to be able to say, it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
We can imagine another world. So,
Yeah, great. Marvelous.
okay.
Thank you so much.
It was
Best wishes,
fun.
everybody.